Hi, my name is Lena. Welcome to my channel, and we are talking about New Testament today. We are talking about Gospel according to Saint Matthew. It's a read-along hosting that Steve Donoghue is hosting. And if you haven't seen Wilsonn Shugart's video about this Gospel, you absolutely should go and watch it, because he discusses in great detail the narrative structure of the gospel, and I enjoyed this video quite a bit. So my video is going to be just my first impressions. I don't have anything deep to say, it's just my first impressions. You probably already heard from me that I wasn't taught the doctrine. Back then, when I was a kid, we didn't have this tradition of studying Bible at Sunday schools. Right now, this tradition is being renewed. So right now, kids are going to Sunday school if parents want it. And back then, it wasn't like that. So I didn't get any education in Christianity. So, but we also didn't have many cartoons on TV. We only had some cartoons, a cartoon, before we went to bed, and sometimes during the day we had cartoons based on Bible. I don't remember how they were called, this series of cartoons, but my brother and I, we watched it. So I am familiar with some of the stories in the Bible, thanks to these cartoons. Also, Bible was quite a big influence on our culture and on, especially on arts. For example, when we in high school, when we went to museums with our class and our class lady, to see some paintings, most likely than not, there would be a painting based on some period of life of Christ. For example, the christening of Christ, or Christ praying for the cup, for it to pass from him. Sorry. So the museum worker, our guide, would always tell us the story behind the painting, the story from the life of Christ. So that's why I was familiar with some parts of the narrative, with some stories. I enjoyed the writing style, I enjoyed the parables. I found the text to be a bit repetitive, but it wasn't annoying because it was beautifully written. I absolutely failed to read this text as a piece of literature, as a not religious text, but I have managed to read it as a newly found piece of religious text, and it was horrifying because I realized how very cult-like it is when Christ tells people that they should leave their mother, they should leave their father, their children, their wife, and follow him. How he tells that they should sell everything they have, and of course he means that they should give the money to poor, but at the same time he says that his pupils shouldn't think about their bread, about their clothes, so that God would provide. But I guess God would provide, the God would provide through such people who would sell everything they own, or other people who would just help. If it hadn't been such a widespread religion, it would have been a very frightening cult, at least for me. The start of the Bible also telling about the influence Bible caused on our culture. So many verses, parts of verses, became sayings that we tell without realizing where they originated from. And this first part, which Steve Donoghue called begots, it actually was, I first saw and hear it in a movie. And it always associated for me with something really, really long and really boring. Sorry about that. And I was really surprised when such a detailed description of a genealogical tree, that it doesn't actually lead to Christ, that Christ wasn't a son of Joseph. So, but it's still important. I understand that it's still important because in Old Testament, I think God was always, so at least for me, I haven't read much of the Old Testament. I started it by myself. It was a read-along with Kathleen Ann. I will leave a link to his church channel in the info box, and I also will leave a link to Wilsonn Shugart channel and to Steve Donoghue's channel. So I think it was kind of hinted that, or that this line will be glorified. And for me, from my small baggage of knowledge, I always thought that it was hinted that Christ will be born to this line, to this genealogical tree, to this line. But he has nothing to do with Joseph, because he is the son of God. But apparently it's very important that Joseph is trusted with this child to bring this child up. And I also saw this thing that Steve Donoghue was talking about, that Matthew tries to bound his narrative with the Old Testament, that it was prophesied, that this was prophesied in Old Testament, and that was prophesied in Old Testament, and this also was prophesied, so that the Christ and everything that happened to him was prophesied in Old Testament. So I saw that. Wilsonn Shugart very well told all about the narrative structure, everything that I failed to see, but it was very interesting and you should watch it. My first impressions that I didn't really like Christ at first because he twice or thrice he says that some exceptions might be made for him because he is the prophesied Son of God and that he is not here on this earth for very long, and that's why some exceptions might be made for him. I didn't like this part, but from the moment when he prayed for the cup to pass from him, he became more human to me, and from this moment I liked him and I felt sorry for him. It might be very strange and I might be terribly wrong, but I felt that he had something of a Socrates about him. When Pharisees tried to catch him on his words, tried to make him to incriminate himself, to expose himself as a fraud, or to say something incriminating so that he could be prosecuted, he always says that those are not my words but yours, and he would start discussing these words and he would slowly turn tables on these Pharisees so that they have nothing left to say, and this reminded me of Socrates. But I didn't read much about Socrates, only one book. It was a very short book by Leo Tolstoy. And I remembered from this book that he would make such discussions. I don't know. It's just a thought that I had reading this gospel. Because I wasn't taught the doctrine and I watched some movies and I read some books, and I had this idea that you don't find in Gospels a mentioning of Christ's brothers and sisters. I don't know why, but I just had this idea that Mary is supposed to stay a virgin till the moment she died, and she never had any children after Christ. And I wasn't actually surprised to find in this gospel according to Matthew this mention of brothers and sisters of Christ. And I mean his brothers and sisters, not his pupils whom he called his brothers. And I was surprised that at the end Matthew never talks about Mary, the mother of Christ. He never calls her Mary, the mother of Christ. But I think he probably mentions her when he says, sorry guys, I had English version somewhere here, when he said that among which women was Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. And earlier on, when neighbors of Christ, the population of the city he lived in, they were talking about him. Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brother James and Joseph and Simon and Judas. And I think that Mary was there because of this influence Bible had on us. Because we have Pieta in Rome, a statue when Mary lamenting Christ, and we have paintings and iconic paintings, icons when Mary is lamenting Christ. And I think that it was made intentionally, that Matthew does not call her mother of Christ because Christ, when he was resurrected. I'm sorry, guys, I read a Russian version. So he wasn't a human being anymore, he was God, and that's why his mother wasn't mentioned as his mother, but as his follower. I have no idea what to talk about, what else to talk about, sorry. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and happy reading.